Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast, celebrating filmmaking, storytelling and cinema across the island of Ireland. For today's episode, academic and journalist Naemi Victoria will be chatting with Daniel Draper, the filmmaker behind the documentary Iron Ladies, which follows the untold story of the working class women who stood at the forefront of the 1984-85 miners' strike. There will be a special screening of this critically acclaimed documentary in Derry's Nerve Centre on Friday the 30th of January at 7 p.m, and the event will feature an exclusive post-screening Q&A with director Dan and film contributor Rose Hunter. So first, have a listen to the trailer here.
You start talking to some people and you mention the strike and they go, oh, God, that again. Do you know what I mean? And I say, hang on. Women gained so much from that strike. It was a win for women.
It's changed my life, definitely for the better.
I would have never done what I've done in my life if it's hadn't been for the strike.
Had it not been for the women, the strike would have ended months before.
What were we going to do? We're going to sort of take a forelock, yes ma'am, or fight. And the choice was to fight.
I went in an old women's picket line. They put in and they were hitting you and they were kicking you on your shins.
We realise now, we were going to get arrested.
The Met were absolute bastards.
I'd rather be a picket than a scab.
A wolf in sheep's clothing.
The biggest politicisation of working class women I have ever seen.
We done it for the working class. Get better standard of living.
We were out, we were gone, and that was our freedom.
Would I do it again? Yeah, I would.
By seeing what those women did, it inspires younger women to take the fight on.
You've got to step forward, make your voice heard. United, we can do things, but we've got to be united.
There's a long way to go before we get what we want. A long way, and we'll keep them fighting.
The 40-year anniversary of the miners' strike was last year. 40 years.
40 years, I know. I remember when we were making our first documentary, we started filming that in 2014, and that was the year of the 30th anniversary. And I remember a few documentaries coming out around then, and I remember, and that's, to me, just seems like it was about 3 years ago, rather than 10. Yeah, which means, we're at the end of this year, so we're almost 8 years towards the 50th anniversary.
That is true. Oh, yeah.
When you put it like that, but the time just marches on, doesn't it?
I think when you put it like that, it always seems so surprising how relevant everything still is. Like, it's so highly relevant for today and for understanding how society works today as a more general observation.
Absolutely, yeah. The ripple effects of 84, 85 are still felt, aren't they?
Yeah, no. Was that what got you interest? I mean, you probably so what got you, because it's there's documentaries on the miners' strike out there, but I think the perspective of the women involved in it is not necessarily addressed as much as it could be. So how did you decide to focus on that?
Yes, so it's weird. So we decided to make this in 2023. So I've got to go back and try and remember. And I was speaking to Heather, who's in the film, and she has a slightly different interpretation of it. And this is the thing with sort of memory, isn't it? My recollection of it is I've always been close with Heather Wood, who's an activist from the Easington area in the northeast of England. She was I interviewed her. She was in a film I made about the Durham Miners Gala in 2019. I've always maintained contact and been in touch. I remember, from what I recall, I remember asking her if she knew if anyone was doing a film dedicated to the strike. Because I know if anyone's going to interview people about the strike, particularly from female perspectives, they're going to go to Heather. So she's got a finger on the pulse, if you like. So I was like, I knew there was many things being made. I knew Sky was doing something, Channel 4 was doing something, the BBC were doing something. There was another independent doc. There was 4 things going on, and so I thought, well, as much as I'm interested in the miners' strike, I don't think we could add anything new to what's being done. Because there was a pretty good doc 10 years ago for the 30th anniversary that was quite comprehensive. So I thought, is there a new angle? And yes, because I know Heather, I knew what she was up to. So National Women Against Pit Closures, the group that Women Against Pit Closures that formed in the 80s. it's sort of not had the resurgence, but it's had the like a rebranding, and they were doing an event to commemorate the 40th anniversary. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to see just that being organised, the minutiae of what it goes, what it takes to organise an event, really. It'd be interesting to film just this like this sort of commemoration, but also how do you get to that celebration? Those little acts of organisation that sort of make something work. Where does the money come from to do that and whatnot? So I asked Heather if I could film those meetings, really, sort of, if she'd trust me to come in and film them, and she said yeah. And then it just started to grow straight away. The first meeting I'd done that in December 2023, and there was about 6 people in a dull white room, but there was an energy there. They were singing. It's not in the film, that bit, but they were singing. There was an energy. I was like, oh, there's something still going here. The fire still burns, you know what I mean? So I think that kick-started the film. And then from there, we went on to travel the country from Scotland down to Kent and interviewed 20 different contributors for the film. So it snowballed quite quickly, really, from December 2023 to the summer of last year.
Yeah, no, I can imagine, especially with like when you've interviewed 20 people, there must be so much footage there.
Yeah, there was really. Yeah, so we brought each interview was probably about an hour each. So yeah, there's about 20 hours of sort of interviews. It didn't seem like a drag to edit, if I'm being honest with you. It would be because we shot sporadically. We would do the interviews and then we would come back and we would cut them up straight away, really. Because I usually find once you've done the interview, you know at the end of the interview or during the interview what you might use, and things start to sort of connect. You know, you start, some person will say something a little bit related to this, so you start editing. I particularly start sort of editing whilst I'm interviewing almost now. So it was not arduous at all in terms of cutting those 20 hours up, because also the women are vastly interesting and really passionate. So even just watching the footage back, you know what I mean? You're like, oh yeah, you feel galvanized by it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You already covered my next question there, because I was wondering how because you start with their recollections of growing up in the documentary, and then also their families, their communities, the strike, and then their involvement in the strike. And while I was watching, I was kind of wondering, is that something that emerged from the footage? But you already touched on that now.
Yeah. Like the build up to like sort of do you know one of the things that I was very conscious of is I suppose there's an easy narrative to tell about the women in the miners' strike, and sort of the easy narrative was that the women were not political at all, and then the strike happened, and then they become political. You know what I mean? And that was it. It changed their lives. I definitely think that did happen in some cases, or it was a sort of it was a big moment in people's lives. But I almost wanted to get across with the family sort of elements and the introduction to each character is like that politics was always in their lives. You know, with working class people, politics is always there, whether you engage with it or not. Whether it's a grandfather who's a communist, or a grandmother who's in a big advocate for trade unions, or even the Labour Party previously. Politics is always in your life. You know, I think I found that myself as a working class sort of filmmaker. Politics was always there my whole life. I just didn't really engage or maybe activate it, but I understood it. But then filmmaking was my sort of part of the keg moments, you know what I mean? So I wanted to get that across, that it was not just, this one moment. It's always there. And I think it's there in every sort of working class person as well.
Was that what got you into documentary filmmaking?
No, although I'm a student of cinema, I love filmmaking. I love, filmmaking came second. I love films and cinema. So I've always been passionate about that. And I started in short films. And then probably after like the second or third one, the big moment for me was I read a book called The Ragged Travel Philanthropists by Robert Tressel, who is a Dubliner, actually, Robin Tressel, but I'm claiming him as a Scouser. Yeah, he was born in Dublin. And he came over to England and was a painter and decorator. But he wrote this novel in his spare time. But he died before the novel was published, and he died in Liverpool. He's buried in Liverpool. That's why I claim him as one of our own. But this book's amazing. It really is. It's about the sort of it's a hard read. It's about 500-600 pages. It's about the reality of work in a coastal town in England. It's cold. It's tough. It's repetitive, but it reflects sort of how work is exploited. And that for me almost sort of it changed my life in many ways. That. that book, because then politics became part of my life, and then because of that, because I've made quite personal films, politics became part of the films. And that, through that book, I met the former MP Dennis Skinner, who we made a documentary about. That was our first feature documentary about Dennis Skinner, which we took that film to Durham, where it played at Durham, which led to the Durham Miners film, you know what I mean? Which led to meeting Heather Wood, which has led to this film. So it's like, it all comes back to the Ragged Trouser Philanthropists, which it's a book I harp on about quite a lot, as you can probably tell.
Just a bit. No, but that's, yeah, no, it's always interesting to hear, yeah, like people's take to on documentary, and also especially because I think it's such a fascinating medium, and it lends itself so well to exploring politics as too, just because it's so closely related to our perception of reality and what we kind of, which voices are being heard, and as a platform as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, the thing is with documentary, it's this thing that I don't agree with at all. This idea that a documentary should be objective. I don't think it should be, because it's a piece of film. You know what I mean? A film is subjective. I think if you're striving for objectivity, it's impossible. Even observational footage is not objective, because you're deciding where to put the camera. You know what I mean? You're deciding what to edit and how to edit it. So this idea that a documentary, I don't know why people think documentaries should be maybe more honest or objective as opposed to fiction stuff, but they do, and I don't agree with that really. I think once you accept that, it sort of liberates you in terms of to tell sort of narratives that you want to tell. So, like, for example, people might not like my work because they might just think it's sort of one-sided politically, but that's who I am as a filmmaker, and that's what I believe in. And also, I believe that the films I make are about underexplored subjects, you know what I mean? And I think it's important that we have working class films about working class culture without worrying about objectivity. You know, and that was one of the things that was important with Iron Lady. It was the idea of like, there'll be no other interviews other than the women, 20 women, because I'm on their side as a filmmaker, you know what I mean? So this idea, like, this is what annoyed me with, as good as some of the docs were that were released last year, it's this idea that we can't just have a working class person go, the police were terrible. We then have to hear from the police go, oh, well, this, we have to do our job, or, we don't like scabs, we have to hear from a scab, kind of thing. And it's this like balancing that, which to me personally, if you're doing a documentary about something so important to the working class, that dilutes it, because you're almost like diluting their voice a little bit. You say, they've said that, but this journalist thinks that, you know what I mean? They've said this, but this policeman has another opinion. So I wanted to strip that all away and sort of make a very proudly biased film about working class women.
And it is about the personal story, like their personal stories. So in a sense, yeah, what you bring to the screen then is capturing their experiences.
Yeah,
think, right?
it is. And you know what? It's interesting with that. So in many ways, I'm from Liverpool, which is mine's in Liverpool. Our industry was the docks. That industry's gone, like the mining industry. But so I've no connection to mining other than how I've got through my filmmaking through Skinner or the Durham Mines Gala or this film. So I see it through the prism of class. This story, it's about a section of the working class, and with a spotlight in that. But in many ways, when I sit here in the office at Liverpool, we have this idea. It's very much academic, it's like this, we'll make this film, the ball starts rolling, and we do start making it. But what you don't realise is, I do realise it, but it was hammered home when I was doing the interviews. It's just like, this is still so fresh and raw in people's lives, you know what I mean? And so why I understand it. I understand it in a very sort of mathematical way. This is what happens. I put opinions on it, what was right and what was wrong. But those people lived it, and that came across when I was interviewing them. And I was like, okay, yeah, this is so instrumental in their lives. You know what I mean? I'll never understand the miners' strike at all like that. You know what I mean? I don't think it'd be impossible for me to. I'll understand to a degree, but without having lived it and lived with the consequences for 40 years, I find that sort of yes, quite sort of moving actually from a sort of filmmaking point of view to hear those stories and sort of almost to feel lucky enough that they would share the stories with me. Because another main thing that we wanted to do was it was a massive thing to interview everyone in their home. A couple of the docs last year, you could see that they'd use green screen or they'd have one location where the other people sort of come to. But it was this idea of like, we want them to be front and center of the story, comfortable. And almost like as the viewers, they're invited into their homes to listen to their narratives, you know what I mean? And to give it that sort of warmth and personality. So, but what saying that when filming it, sometimes we'd be in these tiny living rooms and there'd be only a crew of three of us. It'd be so sort of tight and intimate, you know what I mean? And then you hear in these narratives and you can see the emotion on people's faces. And it's sort of, yeah, I don't think it'll probably quite live with me for a while. But it made me realize that this is important. I knew it was important anyway. I was like, oh no, this is up to, yeah. I was instantly sort of just when you're making a film, you think, who's going to watch this? Is it the right thing to do? Is it? You never know, do you? Especially with this, it was self-funded and funded by trade unions. So if it had loads of backing from like broadcasters or distributors, that might embolden us a little bit more. But with this, you think, is it pointless? I don't know. You know how fresh will this feel compared to other docs? But it was when you're sort of in the moment and that sort of you're filming it, I was like, well, this is the right thing to do. Whether no one watches this at all, we've done something good here by recording these 20 voices and putting them together.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially because I feel like with their perspectives as well, I think from I mean, I mostly read academic texts on the miners' strike. Just because of like it's relevant for my case studies and all that, but their stories were they had they shared a couple of touch points, of course, but then they brought this like the nuance and the novelty of, oh yeah, by the way, like who fed all these people, like the logistics of that, the sheer logistics and the campaigning. These are things that you're not aware of unless you're told.
No, I agree with you. And that the miners' strike, a lot of people think it's irrelevant still. I personally don't. But the miners' strike is often simplified, isn't it? A narrative of it was Scargill versus Thatcher, you know what I mean? Which is easy. People like easy narratives. People are used to Marvel films, you know what I mean? It was this versus that, pick which side you're on, kind of thing. But from my point of view, it was just like, well, I almost see the women during the strike as the workers of the strike, where it was like the miners' strike in general was the workers against the state. If we look under a magnifying glass, I think the women were the workers of that strike. The many small cogs that literally kept it going. You know what I mean? So if you see a documentary about the miners' strike and it is like Scargill versus Thatcher, and you see stuff at Orgreave or you see stuff at picket lines, it's like you just said, well, who fed those people? You know what I mean? Who kept that going? Who raised the money for the coaches? You know what I mean? To sort of get to picket lines. Who sort of fed the kids when the fathers were at picket lines, kind of thing, and what made those little things sort of happen. And obviously, it was not just the women, but the women played a massive part in that. So yeah, that's why I particularly thought it would be interesting to explore.
So, having made that documentary, what do you think are the key differences from the stories of those women to the memory of the miners' strike that is in public memory, or like the version of the miners' strike that is in public memory?
It's interesting that, isn't it, about like public memory? Yes, I think a lady in our film says some people go like, "Oh, you're talking about the strike again." You know what I mean? I definitely think there's some sections of society that still think that it's of the past, if you like. Or yeah, I don't subscribe to that at all. It's this idea, like, again, I just think people just think it's part of the past. It was an industrial sort of movement against the Thatcher governments, and it weren't. It was sort of much more nuanced than that, and we need to understand sort of what the impacts it had, the sort of reverberations that strike had on communities that is still absolutely present today across the country and just across sort of society, really, in terms of trade unions losing power, workers sort of not being in unions now and whatnot. Yeah, it's that collective memory of it's interesting that the collective memory, because also people who experience a strike will have a different sort of memory of it. You know, you can see the whole fall of the red wall stuff a few years ago. The idea that like these working class communities are no longer politicized, or politicized, maybe the politics has shifted in another sort of dimension. It's all still relevant, and yes, whether I don't know, I can't speak for the public conscience of consciousness of what do you think of the miners' strike, but we can only from a filmmaking point of view, you can only offer something that hasn't been put forward, and sort of not just. And also, key for me is not just patting the women on the head and saying, well done. So in one of the documentaries, two of our contributors feature in it, and like those sound bites they use are just the poor. I've interviewed both these women. I know the stories of these women. So and collectively, so in this one doc, I won't say which one it is. They do have the story of the women, but it equates to about 4 minutes of footage out of a 2-hour documentary. You know what I mean? Which that's their prerogative as filmmakers. You know, they might want to explore what happened there, cover up or what happened in the road grave. But for me, at least, you know, this is not going to have the reach of those other films. There's no way that anyone would pick this up because of its how subjective it is. But it just exists as a sort of testament to like these women.
So you already mentioned the impact that the strike has had on the communities and the continuing impact that is felt today. And I think it was really interesting that you included these images of the towns before in the documentary before moving to the interview, moving on to the interviews. What was it like visiting the towns?
Yeah, it's interesting, really. It's interesting for me being from Liverpool, you know, because when you think about the working class movement in Liverpool, it's so dense. Liverpool's because it's a city, you know, we're all sort of on top of each other, kind of thing. So it's interesting when you go to these like mining towns, of how spread out they are. You know what I mean? How almost in touch with the landscape they are. You know, sort of a lot of people understand sort of nature a lot more than they would the working classes in cities, because they're surrounded by it. Yes, it's like what you would expect, really. You know, it's almost ghost-like to some degree, and so in some places, as you've seen in the film, we do include some headstocks and some sort of like remnants of mining, of you know how mining is still on the landscape quite physically, and we wanted to play on that really, that it's still there, you know. So again, to go back to that thing of like people have maybe you know, as a nation, people have moved on from the miners' strike. Well, none of you live in Barnsley, or you know, if you live in Allerton, it's still there. Even if it's not just the sort of the mental scars, it's on the landscape. It's everywhere. You know what I mean? So it's impossible not to be reminded of what happened 40 years ago, which again must be quite hard to deal with. It must be really hard to deal with in many ways. And again, I suppose that's the difference between as a filmmaker, I have that separation, but I hope sort of we get that across in the small way we do by showing the towns and the landscapes.
What I found very fascinating as well is that it doesn't stop after the strike. It was mentioned in one of the interviews as well that it's always framed as defeat, but these women kept going afterwards, so their work didn't stop there.
Yeah, exactly. So we start the film in 1994 to make that point of like, you know, to talk about demand strike, but we started in 94, 10 years after the strike, because they were still going then and they're still going now. And it just goes to show you that, you know, with this idea is what like politics and grassroots politics, it means a lot more to working class people and people at the bottom of it all, because it's their lives, it's their communities. So this idea that the strike might be over and you would just stop your activism, well, there's almost no option to do that. And as you can see, all the women are still active today. It's part of their lives in many ways, and yet it inspires me. I think that I don't know why I worry, but you know, I'm 38. I'm quite political and strongly political, but I don't know why I worry about this, but you think, oh, what if that goes as I get older? You know what I mean? What if you lose that fire? Because you hear about so many people, don't you, lose that like fire within? I don't think I will, but it slightly worries me, you know. But then seeing these women in the 70s and 80s who absolutely are class warriors and still have that fire, it inspires me to the point where you just think, that's all I want to be when I grow up. You know what I mean? I want to be the same person in my 70s and 80s that I am now, and have the same convictions and the same sort of depth of the humanity, really, isn't it? Because that's what it is. It's humanity at its finest. I want to be like Heather Wood when I grow up. That's my new aim. I used to want to be Ridley Scott when I got older, but now I want to be like Heather Wood or the other women in the film. Yeah.
So with the title Iron Ladies, you know, keeping the fight going, or like their like involvement in the communities, involvement in the grassroots politics that you mentioned. What inspired the title?
Ooh, yes. A few people asked that actually. So there's I think the thing that put it in our mind was one of our interviewees, Aggie Currie. She says, you know, she was one Iron Lady. We were hundreds. And I quite like, and we almost ran with that. And we thought, why don't we sort of reclaim that word? You know what I mean? That phrase is it's known. It's like what Thatcher was known for. And we thought, okay, what if we take it back? And you know, we know what Thatcher represents, but what if we take it back for sort of working class women in many ways, and sort of use it against. Or is very much a sort of, in a way, a sort of use it against sort of Thatcher and what Thatcher represents. Okay, what if Iron Lady represented something else? An Iron Lady was not just a sort of self-centered sort of capitalist who was hell-bent on destroying trade unions and communities, but what if the Iron Lady is a working class woman who cares about their community? And that's, the tricky thing is, you've seen the film, we didn't want to have any footage, images, or footage, or even the voice of that woman. So we try and do that quite sort of creatively in the film. So, and again, it was that
You
thing.
did?
Yes, yeah. It's like we take her voice away. You know, she's not in this. She obviously is in the story, but in a ghostly-like way, because you can't deny that. But it's just like we had to deal with the problem of Thatcher in the film because people mention it and thought, okay, we've got to put it in, but we're not letting her. Yeah, we're going to put it in our own terms, and that's the thing with our own terms. It goes back to what you're saying before. I don't think I answered that properly actually. The idea that the strike was lost, but some of the women in the film say, well, we didn't lose the strike because we set out to support the strike for as long as it went on, feed the families, help with raising funds, and they did. You know what I mean? As from there, so that's what goes back to that idea. The workers of the strike, they did exactly what was required of them for as long as was possible. And I think that's a good point. And also, as someone said, how could you be defeated if 40 years later you're still there and still fight for the same principles? Which again, that's where the hope comes from, isn't it? That's where the fire to still sort of fight. And also the relevance. It brings it again back to the earlier question. Why is it still relevant? Well, it just is, isn't it? Because we still have workers' poverty and workers' rights need fighting for, and many things.
And it was also really interesting. It was mentioned in the documentary as well how the strike and the outcome has shaped work today. And for instance, I think, was it 0-hour contracts that was mentioned? And
yeah, 0-hour contracts. I think Linda contributes as unions are being emasculated. And it's right, really, isn't it? You know, when you look back and you look at the power of trade unions. So this idea that a trade union could sort of get into a fist fight with the state is just like unheard of now. You know what I mean? We've got so many it's so disparate, isn't it, in terms of the workforce today? That all goes back, doesn't it, to what happened in the 80s? I think what shows that incredibly well is the latest Adam Curtis series, Shifty. I'm not too sure if you've seen it, but it starts in 1979 when Thatcher gets in and goes to today, and so it's like how this disintegration of society started with her getting in and this sort of free market enterprise, and just the erosion of community and society can be traced back to 79, and then because the miners' strike was obviously a big part of that. Yeah, it's highly I personally think it's highly relevant.
I was just thinking about what was said in the documentary as well by one of the women, that what I found really relevant as well there was this notion of the future, this notion of community and the hope to keep going no matter what. So despite these changes happening, they're still there for their communities, and they're still working, and they're still contributing to that. And yeah, the frequent return to solidarity in the documentary, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and it's massive. It's what keeps the momentum going, really, is it? That idea of still fighting in the solidarity. And yeah, as Heather says, it's about continuing that fight, but then it's also about trying to inspire the next generation, you know, because this generation probably doesn't have that sort of the roots that those communities had to sort of fight back that they did in sort of 84. You know, these were communities built around the pits and built around mines, so they were deep rooted in sort of in politics and trade union activity. So when fights were necessary, it was something they're all ready to build on. I don't feel like this generation has that. You know what I mean? If you work in sort of for Deliveroo or if you work for Sports Direct, you don't have that. There's no network like that in many ways. So it's always going to be hard to mobilize on a sort of mass scale, I suppose, in that. But all you can do is sort of, like the women do, is start from the bottom, the grassroots. And that's why, for me, it's the purest form of politics. What the women did in 84 and today is you can sort of try, affect your own community. You know what I mean? And build that way, you know what I mean? For me personally, especially in this country, I've no